Wanted to spend some time with my top 5 favorite hunting and habitat myths that some of them have been around for decades. Things that hunters shouldn't do in the woods, things that deer do and or always do when they don't. And I want to discuss these with you because it might help your planning for next year. It might help you really narrow down what's important in the woods, what's not, what's important in the habitat, and what's not. The first one, peeing in the woods. I heard long ago, decades ago in the 80s, that you shouldn't pee in the woods. You know, it's going to spook deer. Deer can smell human urine. Folks, all urine turns to ammonia within 20 minutes. And I actually think that we've used human pee. We've peed on our mock scrapes for years. I've been doing that since the early 2000s. In fact, if you really want to take the time, you can look up on Google, type in "to pee or not to pee." I know, a really catchy title, but it sounded cool back in 2008, 2010 when I first wrote it. I put it out on my blog site in 2012. And if you just write "to pee or not to pee," mock scrape, or for deer, that kind of thing, it'll come up right on top on Google. And you can see that I've been doing this for years. Peeing on scrapes, opening up our scrapes that way. Now I'm diabetic, my sugar's been a little bit high lately, so it seems like you used to be able to hold, now I have to go pee all day, maybe on the way to the stand or something. But unfortunately, lately I have to urinate off the stand a few times, and during an all-day sit especially. And I've learned the deer pay absolutely zero attention. So if you really want to get away from those little disgusting pee bottles that you keep in your blind, or that you use for your tree stand that you keep in a, I've even seen people carry a pee bottle in their backpack. I mean, just something I would have never done anyways, but you don't have to worry about it. It's a really big myth. And I think it could make it a little bit more convenient for you if you don't have to worry about it. So peeing in the woods, not a big deal. I've even heard, I think it was Ted Nugent years ago, talked about drinking apple juice, so then he'd go pee and his pee would smell better that way. It smells like apple, so to bring the deer in. But for whatever you're doing, don't worry about it. It really is a big myth. Next one, the dry doe myth. So we took out that old dry doe, we shot her because she's not producing any fawns. And folks, that is a huge myth. I was told by a leading deer research biologist long ago that if a deer or if a doe is not going to have fawns, it's because she's dying. Basically, there was a doe I heard about over on the eastern side of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan that was in captivity. It was 22, 23 years old, and it had had twins and triplets its whole life leading up to its final death when it was 22, 23 years old. As long as they're alive, as long as they're healthy, as long as they're not dying, they're going to keep producing fawns. Now every year we see does that are obviously dry, but that doesn't mean that she didn't have fawns, that she's not able to conceive, that she won't have fawns in the future. It probably just means the coyote's got her fawns, fawns got hit by a car, whatever. Predator got the fawns. But, and then what you find too, and this is something interesting, with the older a doe becomes, they have studies that prove that she's a better mother. And part of that goes back to not only her fawning grounds that she takes over during the summertime and the quality of forage and habitat that fawns have to survive on, the amount of cover that she puts them in. And they found that the older the doe would get, the further her fawns are away from each other. So if she has twins, instead of being 20 feet apart, they're 20 yards or 200 yards apart, whatever that distance is. And that makes sure that when, and there's a name for that, but that makes sure when a predator gets this fawn over here, this fawn's far enough away that it's not getting that fawn. So the old dry doe myth is purely a myth. Unless she's dying, she's going to have fawns. You can count on that each and every year. Another myth that you can look at every year, and I talked about this in scouting buck bedding areas in another video we just recently did, is that bucks always bed on the downwind side of does and fawns. Now it sounds pretty cool if there's a habitat manager out there or someone that wants to, you know, sound like they know what they're doing when it comes to this bedding area. It sounds pretty cool to talk about, that, yeah, you always have to make, the does are here and the bucks are always downwind of that. And if that were true, then bucks are always moving, they're always changing their bedding areas by quarter mile. Imagine if you have a giant ag field. When the wind's blowing this way, then those does would have to be here every time, and then that buck would have to be here. If the wind's blowing that way, Then when those does bed over here, the buck obviously wouldn't bed out in the open field when the wind's blowing back out into the field. So those does would actually have to change their bedding area to the other side of the field, and the bucks would have to move with them. It sounds good on paper, but it's not realistic and it doesn't make a lot of sense. Instead, what I find is you have food consistently. If you have adjacent bedding area within that first 50 to 100 yards, wilderness area, maybe 200-300 yards, those does will bed there and the bucks will bed behind them. It doesn't matter which way the wind's blowing. It doesn't even matter what direction you're facing. It doesn't matter if this is going east into the woods or west into the woods. It really doesn't matter. Food, major food sources, afternoon food sources, could even be bait piles up north, could be a giant ag field down in western Illinois. It doesn't really matter. Ag field, big river bottom, brush, woods on the backside. You're going to find does bedding next to that ag field and then bucks behind them. It doesn't matter the direction. You're always going to see that. There are exceptions to everything in life, including deer, but that's a big myth out there that bucks are always going to bed downwind, and for that they would always have to be changing. It'd be a big, giant, confusing mess. And what I find on small properties and what I find for scouting small properties and deer herds for a living since 2005 on 800 client parcels is that consistently and definitively you can look at aerial photo, you can pick out food, you can pick out adjacent doe bedding and bedding area for does, and then the bucks are behind them. They have to have that remote spot to be into. Big myth out there. So if you're out scouting this off-season wintertime, if you're planning your habitat on your property, keep that in mind and plan accordingly. Next great myth that I see, and I have a hard time with this one because I see clients that, you know, we're out in the woods and they're excited because they see this track with the toes out and the two dew claws behind. And folks, that's always a mature buck, right? And it isn't. That's a running deer. And so many times I'll see a client that points out that, man, we have that's that big buck, that's that big track we see on the property all the time. And you can look at it and see by the size of the toes and the distance by the dew claws. Could be a fawn, could be a medium-sized doe, a yearling buck, but it is not a mature buck running. And you can see that track where either they're 4 feet apart and it's just stomping through, or it's actually running where they're grouped together. Check that out on your trail cameras. Don't believe me, just look on your trail cameras. When you go out there, look in the mud, look, you know, this deer is fresh, just walk through the snow, and then you check your trail camera and see what deer it was. But you're gonna find that, sure, a big buck in the snow, when it's walking normally, you'll probably see those dew claws in the back, and you'll probably see that swayed out bow in the snow between the stride too. You'll notice that stride is wider. You can identify that it is a mature buck in the snow. It's pretty easily to do that. Their bodies are wider, their stance is wider, their spacing is wider. You can even take a stick and cut it off and check between that stride and those tracks and realize that's a lot bigger stride and it's wider apart, track to track, side to side, than an adult doe and certainly a fawn. But when it comes to tracks and looking at them in the mud, that dew claw is hardly ever an indicator that it was a mature buck going through your property. Really get to know those tracks. I grew up looking at tracks. That's something that we did often. I love and I enjoy doing, getting to know bucks by their track. And often what I find, as a general rule, my hand's a little smaller, but if you take those 3 fingers right there and you lay that into a nice, clean, pure track that's not splayed out, not dew claws, and that deer track goes around those fingers, then there's a great chance that that's a mature buck. You know, there are mature bucks that have smaller feet, I'm sure, of course, but a mature buck ages, they don't actually get their full frame size till about the age 4. And when they do, a lot of times they have some pretty big toes. And yes, they push their weight down on those dew claws at times, especially when they're standing, they're making a scrape and they're putting a little bit more pressure maybe on the side of a hill. But if you go through the woods thinking that every track that's splayed out and has a dew claw behind it is big buck, it's kind of cool because you can think, well, there's mature bucks running everywhere on the property, but it's not realistic. And that brings me to my 5th point with of greatest myths, and I know there's a lot more. In fact, I left my list back in the trucks and I had 6 on, so I know I'm missing one, and that really bugs me right now. But greatest myth is that scent control and controlling your scent overall in the woods will lead you to the greatest amount of success. It's really hard because there's so many scent control products on the market. And what I see are a lot of hunters that are not seasoned hunters, not experienced, and they put a lot of faith, total faith control into those scent control products. And the number one form of scent control, as you can see behind me, I have a really good stand location, one we love. I sat here, had a couple real nice bucks go by during late October. This right here is southwest, west, northwest. And when I'm sitting here in the morning and I get to the stand, there's a lot of low vegetation around here. We have a 2-track right down here that's never used. It's just a sandy dirt washed out track we can walk on, not leave our scent. When I get into this stand right here, I could smell like the world's worst hunter, the worst smelling hunter, and I'm not gonna spook any deer because my scent is blowing away with the morning thermals. It's blowing off this point, it's blowing out behind the valley that you can see behind me. And I'm not gonna spook any deer because that scent's never gonna get down to the nose of those deer. If you're sitting on the outside of a thick line of brush inside the woods, and you're right on that edge where bucks are traveling and cruising back and forth, you're blowing it out into mature hardwoods, you're blowing it out into mature pines that have no food and don't hold deer during the day. If you're blowing it out into a lake, a waterway, a beaver pond, a road, whatever it might be, the best form of scent control takes place with the stand location and locating that stand on the outside edge of thick security cover, the downwind edge of a bedding area, whatever it might be. That's the number one way to control your scent. Now, that's not to say that I don't control my scent. I still dress outside the truck. I still have clean clothes. I still spray down with a scent eliminator. We're using a limit shield right now. Going back to the late 80s, I think it was Scent Shield. I think Miles Keller even had his own, little face or name on a Scent Shield bottle from back in the day in the late 80s. It was a green and white bottle, if you guys remember. I'm dating myself, but I use a spray down eliminator. I spray my boots down. Right now they have some foam products. Hunter Safety System has some foam products, the Limit Shield, where I can wipe down my arms. You're supposed to hold the scent. So I'm shampooing, I'm washing my body with a scent control, scent eliminator, no scent type soap. I'm using a foam if I can. Now they have those new products. I'm spraying down before I go out into the woods religiously. I've done that for over 30 years now. And so I'm really trying to not leave a scent trail in and out of the woods. That's the way I control my scent as far as leaving a scent signature in the woods and brushing up against any kind of brush. I'm also removing a lot of sticks and debris away from my scent trail so things aren't coming up and slapping me in the side and getting my scent and coming down. I'm making sure my outside body is very clean. That's the way you control your scent. Once you're on stand, there's not much you can do about it. And so, yeah, there's a lot of steps that you can do, but pretty easy. I'm taking care of the stand location during the summertime or spring. I'm making sure that, yeah, I'm planning this stand location so I'm not going to get any deer downwind to me. I'm planning my access route in the off season. I'm keeping my clothes clean. When I take a shower, I'm using scent control products. I'm spraying down, but all that happens, early season and mid season and before hunt and pre-hunt planting. Once you're out here, it's all boils down to stand location. And I'll say, on the flip side, many people put a lot of effort into scent control and they don't control the sound. We did a recent video on controlling your sound, and that's the number one way to spook deer. Think of it this way, even if that scent was going downhill behind me, I'm probably gonna contaminate a 45 to 90 degree window of a bad scent area. I still have this movement right through here. I still have the movement around the bend. I still have the movement that comes over here. I'm just contaminating a 45 to 90 degree wedge. On the flip side, people don't pay enough attention to sound. If this is a noisy, squeaky stand, for one, I'm not going to use it. I only use high quality tree stand company, family tradition right here. They're no sound. But when you have sound in the stand, when your clothing makes a noise, when your backpack snaps against a piece of metal, when you rub up against a tree or something to move to get a shot, that sound extends 360 degrees around your tree stand. So think about that. If your sound can be heard 200 yards away, you're clearing deer, especially mature bucks, wary animals, older does, you're clearing those deer out within a 200 yard, 360 degree direction from your tree stand or from when you even walk in the woods, where scent only spoils at 45 degrees, 90 degrees downwind. Those 5 myths, I think if you pay attention to those, they're not just things that'll make it more convenient for you in the woods or when you hunt, but they're things you can plan your hunt around, your habitat around, and make sure that not only do you have a more successful hunt and more successful off-season this coming year, but they actually have more success in the woods and have a more convenient and enjoyable time while spending time in the great outdoors pursuing the whitetails that we all have an extreme level of passion for.